Hi, I'm Victor Lucas from the Electric Playground, and I've been a part of the video game community for about 16 years and a fan of Japanese video games for more than half my life. And as a fan, the events in Japan recently have really affected me, and I had this feeling that people in the video game community were feeling the same way that I was. So I sent emails out to friends and colleagues in the video game community, people that write about video games, people that make them, people that work on other video game television shows, and I asked them to get involved to help raise awareness and to raise donations for the Red Cross and its quake and tsunami relief efforts. And everybody jumped on board right away. And I have to tell you, after taking a look at this footage, it's very clear to me without a doubt that gamers love Japan.
If I think about the Japanese games creators, there's a hell of a lot of them. But, you know, King of the Hill has to be Miyamoto. Right from the first time I played one of his games, Donkey Kong, you know, in the arcades, up until the present day, he's consistently given us experiences that have obsessed me and have shown me the way forward in gameplay and in innovation, and he's just so wonderfully consistent. The best game out of Japan, I mean, it's like trying to, you know, go into a sweet shop and pick a sweet. I mean, there's hundreds of games that have been brilliant. But really, you know, what Miyamoto did with Super Mario 64 is he took his platform game and turned it into a 3D world. It was a huge world, it was engaging, there was so many new mechanics in there. It just made you feel, you know, 3D, here we come, and I thought that was a seminal moment in computer gaming. I love going to Japan. It's like going to another planet. It's the colors, the vibrance of the people, the energy of the people. It's the craziness of the world. You can turn around a corner and it could be full of, you know, karaoke bars, and another corner can be a university full of students, and another corner can be just an amazing assault on the senses with all the bright lights. It's just an incredible place to go. And that, coupled with this culture that has existed for thousands of years, that is, you know, so consistent. It's an unbelievably safe place to go. It's, you know, the people respect each other. It's just like nowhere else on earth.
The thing that really jumps out at me about Japanese games are the aesthetic. It's one that's always captivated me. There have been plenty of games that have loved over the years, all the way from Ninja Gaiden and Strider. Castlevania Symphony of the Night has always been a big favorite of mine, but it hasn't just been video games, it's also been anime, because in many respects the two cultures kind of overlap, at least they did for me. Ghost in the Shell, Evangelion have all had an impact on me in many similar ways as the games that I've played from Japan. I've lived in Japan for 3 years, and there wasn't a day that went by my entire time there that I had a bad experience just engaging, interacting, and socializing with folks in Japan. If I had an opportunity to go back and live in Japan for a while, and I'd take them up on that.
There's not only one game that inspired me to work in the video game industry. There's tons of them. My favorite video game creator is Yu Suzuki. He created games such as Virtual Fighter, Hang-On, Outrun, Daytona USA. He's the one who brings a lot of innovation in the video game industry.
For me, the best game to come out of Japan is Resident Evil. It introduced us to the world of survival horror. The sequel, Resident Evil 2, was perhaps in some ways a better game, but I always get nostalgic for the original Resident Evil. And it also introduced the genre of video games, survival horror. And while we're talking about Shinji Mikami, I should point out that he was also the planner behind Aladdin for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and that was one of the only video games based on a movie that didn't completely suck. I think Japanese video games stand out because the culture of Japan is so different from North America and Europe, where in Japan they have different priorities when it comes to elements of game design. Their style, their storytelling priorities are just different. So when you pick up a game from Japan, you know it's going to be a very different experience from what you'll get from a typical North American game.
When I think of Japanese game creators, there's only one name that comes to mind, and that's Shigeru Miyamoto, because he's made some of the best games in the world ever. The best game to come out of Japan, for me, has to be Mario 64. For me, that one was very special. I remember playing that for the first time and it being a very magical and sort of immersive experience. Totally loved it. And I wouldn't say that's just one of the best games to come out of Japan, I'd say that's one of the best games in the world.
You know, I think Japanese games are special because For me, and I think for you guys as well, growing up, it was always the mystique of there's this faraway land where magic happens, and that magic is Super Mario Brothers, and you know, they literally owned the space. I mean, that was where games were made. That's where everything, that whole industry was made in Japan.
Do you guys remember games like the original Ninja Gaiden?
Oh, yeah.
It's so Japanese. And same thing with Street Fighter, where you have this samurai culture, this ninja culture that as a kid I was completely obsessed with.
Yeah, like Shinobi, Revenge of Shinobi.
Oh my
Love
gosh.
that.
Yeah. Well, I think the best games to have come out of Japan
Plural.
are Ico and Shadow of the Colossus. They are distinctly Japanese in that they are extremely poetic and kind of a little messagey in the way that a Miyazaki movie would be.
Those games were so inspiring, and it made you want to live in those worlds and talk about those worlds. And I think,
There's so many reasons to love Japan. The noodles being fairly hot. Sushi? Are you kidding me? Anybody that brings me sushi, I'm in.
I went as an exchange student to Japan when I was 16. I had my 17th birthday there, and I was enamored with the culture and the romanticism of that sort of honorable samurai culture that I was super into Street Fighter at that time and super into Japanese fighting games.
There are things in Japan that we would love that you can't have. You just can't get them.
You can't get them.
I finally went to Japan for the first time 2 or 3 years ago. I've only been once, and it was so overwhelming. And you go to, like, you know, Akihabara, which is the sort of like electronics district, and you go in and you're like, this is serious electronics. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like 5 Radio
around
Shacks
anymore.
exploded into the streets, and that's like, I mean, it's like being in Blade Runner. It's great. I mean, Japan. It's Japan.
Japan.
We love Japan.
Yeah.
I think what makes Japanese games really unique is their culture. I mean, and they're not afraid to show that in their games. Whether it's in the artistic direction, the story, the type of humor, or even the gameplay and the way that the game is tweaked or balanced, you do feel that it's a Japanese game when you play it. You know, they have the Japanese touch. It's something that you find in Japanese games that you don't find anywhere else. My favorite game that was made in Japan has to be Final Fantasy I. I spent the entire summer of 1990 playing that game, and probably fall and winter and the spring following that. It has to be the game that I finish most often. It just delivered the fantasy of playing Dungeons and Dragons so well that I just loved it.
You know, I love Japan. I love what Japan's given to the world, especially the games it's given to the world, the culture it's given us. And I would appeal to you, if you've felt any enjoyment from any computer game from Japan, they really need our help now. Just go online to the website, donate something however small, just please give to help.
Japan and Japanese game makers and Japanese game designers have had an incredible influence on the progression of video games, both in the games they've made for us all the way back to Space Invaders and Pac-Man, and the incredible technology that's come out of Japan, the Nintendo systems, Sony systems, etc. They pushed the boundaries forward both in terms of game design and in terms of game hardware. When I was a youngster, I had no idea that there was this concept of computers could be fun until I played with Space Invaders and Pac-Man. But as soon as I saw that opportunity, I realized that was something that I wanted to do with my career, with my life. In a lot of ways, Japanese games were what inspired me to become a game designer. I have to say that my favorite Japanese game is the Gran Turismo series. I am a fan of the racing games, and those games just kind of grab me. They're one of the few games that I found myself 3 or 4 in the morning having to just one more race. This is just a great time to acknowledge the contributions that Japan has made to the gaming industry and how they've really changed all of our lives as gamers and how important that has been to us. And I think it's an opportunity for us to give a little bit back.
What seems to be so unique and special about Japanese games is that there's a touch of both the familiar and the completely unfamiliar. And you can just see that in gameplay styles and imagery that seems like you've seen it before somewhere in American pop culture, but once it gets into the hands of a Japanese developer, it's really turned around into something that's intriguing because you want to understand it better and better. And I think that's really at the core of why so many people love Japanese games and why they are willing to commit so many hours trying to better understand those worlds they create. My favorite at the end of the day has got to be Suda51. His level of daring and innovation is a little bit awe-inspiring. I mean, Killer 7, I cannot imagine any other human being on the earth making that game. And he just finds a way to take American pop culture icons, his punk ethos, all those things that we kind of find so blasé here in the US, and refashions them in a game that they They seem either completely silly or like they're brand new. They're so awesome for the first time over. There's one game that inspired me to get into video games. It's Ghosts and Goblins. Now, of course, I was so young when I was playing it, I didn't know if it was Japanese or Czech, but at the end of the day, it was just completely awesome. It really was, to my mind, one of the first games that had such a clear sense of art direction, a sense of mystery in this world. I think the best game to come out of Japan would have to be Ueda-san's Eco. It just shows the level of daring you are able to see in Japanese game design. I have a hard time imagining that game being made anywhere else. And just the idea of trying to say, like, hey, here's a game with absolutely no talking where a boy tries to lead a girl out of a dungeon and he has horns on his head. It really is a touching, beautiful game that understands that less can be so much more in a game, and it really is one of those rare special accomplishments in all of game design. You walk into the streets of Tokyo and you see those buildings going all the way up to the sky and those video screens, and you feel you're in a place that is just absolutely alive and electric and seems to have a very, very good sense of the modern and always trying to go one step further.
It's one of the things for me that's always made Japanese games, extremely special, whether, back from when I was a kid or whether now. It's simply kind of the culture that gets mixed into the Japanese games themselves. I guess I'd actually have to say Torinobu Itagaki is probably my favorite Japanese game developer. It's not to say, I don't got mad respect for Miyamoto and Yu Suzuki and a bunch of other guys I grew up idolizing because they made, the games that I have known and loved. But really, I think it's just the fact that, Ninja Gaiden was an awesome game and it kind of, stacked up there pretty high for me for the games that I loved when I was playing them on the NES. Really, it's kind of like the overall, Japanese gaming package that was kind of really what pushed me into wanting to know more about Japan. And there's so many reasons Japan is super awesome. And if I had to go with why I love Japan, Japan is gaming to me in a lot of ways. If I think about the first trip I ever went over to Japan and got to see these arcades that were there still, even though they had pretty much died in America. So I love Japan because it's kind of like Blade Runner with really good sushi and really good games.
Japanese games have had such a huge impact on our industry as a whole. For me, one of my personal favorites is Donkey Kong. Any Miyamoto game is good. Donkey Kong for me had a profound impact. It made me want to go to the arcade, just want to play more. And it wasn't even that I was amazing at it, it just drew me in. It was just so fun. It was something that made me love the industry.
I think Japanese games are amazingly unique because of their visual aesthetics as well. I particularly think characters like Bomberman, Super Bomberman. The Japanese have a much more lithe, kind of sleek character design, and almost all their character designs that you just don't see in America. There's just a really neat illustrative style that comes out in Japanese aesthetic.
Really, the game that just blew my mind was Silent Hill 2. I absolutely love that game. I think that it, just in terms of horror storytelling, it allowed me to feel horror in a way that I had never experienced it before.
The thing that makes Japanese games so special to me is they just build upon the sort of very rich history of storytelling that exists within Japan. It's impossible to say what the best game that's come out of Japan is, because when I think back of loads of the games that I've played throughout my life, many of my favorites are Japanese. I think probably the one that I really remember having the biggest impact on me was actually Donkey Kong on the Game & Watch. And I just remember long car journeys or being with my brothers and sisters and us playing this beloved Game & Watch. And I was just, as I was answering this question, I was just thinking that to me is probably an important, one of the most important, brings back lots of memories. I love Japan because Japan is a total feast for the senses. Everywhere you go, everything you experience is just amazingly vivid, and I love the smells and the sound and what it looks like, and I love what I eat there. I've never left Japan not feeling way more inspired than when I arrived. It's just a very magical place.
What's special about Japanese games? Well, the gameplay is mainly special. You never know what you're going to get from these games. Take a game like Katamari Damacy. When this game came out, what do? You roll up a ball with junk. That was fun. Of course, there's a game that made it happen for me in the business. It was Castlevania. That was the game that gave me a taste of what was forthcoming in the industry. And that's what made me go into that business, actually. I love that game, still play it.
What makes Japanese games so special is their unique perspective, especially from American audiences. Japanese games are created by designers who came from a completely different culture, which really gives them a unique presentation and experience that you can't find anywhere else. One Japanese game that inspired me was probably Pac-Man. I know it sounds like the simple answer, but it was one of those games that was easy to pick up and play, difficult to master, and it attracted so many players. It certainly was one of the inspirations.